So, you want to try making dolls. How do you even get started? What sort of dolls should you make? Is there anything you need to consider before you start selling them? What about patterns? It can all seem very confusing when you start out as a doll maker, but don't worry, I'm here to help. I always loved being creative and making things, but I didn't really start doll making until I was in my 30s. I'd just graduated from university with a first-class health science degree. I'd spent 4 years working towards that, and I was planning a career in healthcare when I totally crashed and fell into a long period of burnout. At that time, I didn't know I was autistic. I just knew there was absolutely no way I could go back into the workplace. As months went by, I started to explore a few business ideas and look for things I could do to get out of the rut I was in and start to get my spark back. Nothing really took off until one day my teenage daughter came home from school with a doll's head that her friend had customised for her. It was very creative, and it sparked a great conversation about goth and emo culture and about dolls in general. That conversation started the cogs turning in my brain, and I started talking to people and researching and realised that there was a huge group of people out there, mostly but not exclusively women and teenage girls, who wanted dolls that were a little bit different to what was widely available. Something handmade, unique, with a bit of an alternative twist. I had an idea, I just needed the skills to bring that idea into reality. At the same time, someone I knew was learning to make cloth dolls. She introduced me to a Facebook group for doll makers. That little community was such a good source of information and support. Many people in the group who were just starting out were learning by making dolls from existing patterns. I wanted something that was unique to me. I didn't want a carbon copy of everybody else's dolls. The problem was I had no idea how to make my own pattern. I drew out a basic cookie cutter shape from cardboard and made a few dolls to that. They were very simple, floppy rag dolls with yarn hair and button eyes. They were pretty wonky, but I made a Facebook page anyway to share them with the world, and people actually seemed to like them. Now I was starting to think I could actually maybe do something with this, but the cookie cutter shape had to go. I bought some doll making books. One of the books I got was quite old. I don't think I have that one anymore, and I can't remember the author's name, but it had some basic doll patterns in the back that were copyright free. So I picked one of those and started there. Over time, I took that pattern and started to adapt it. I didn't like the shape of the hands and feet, so I changed those first. Then I changed a bit more and a bit more until I had a pattern that was completely my own. I'll put some links in the show notes to some of the books that I found helpful. The Jan Horrocks books were great when I was starting out, and Susanna Orion's doll making books have been absolutely indispensable. I think at first I found those a little bit advanced and kind of daunting, but I've gone back to them time and time again over the years. I still pick them up sometimes and learn something new. So that's basically how I started, though I did try making a few different kinds of dolls along the way. If you're brand new to doll making, I think it helps to have a good idea of exactly what you want to make and why. I think I struggled at first because I really didn't have a clear idea of who my target market was. So if you're thinking of making dolls for other people, whether that's just for fun or if you're thinking of turning it into a business, here are some questions to ask yourself. Firstly, who are you making them for? Dolls made for adult collectors are going to be very different from dolls you make for a child. Toy safety laws vary depending on where you are in the world. In the UK and Europe, they're quite strict. When I started, I thought I could just make a cloth doll and put a little disclaimer on the label saying not for very young children. But that's not quite the case here. If you make dolls to sell that are intended for children under the age of 14, you have to put each design through some pretty extensive testing to make sure they're not going to pull apart easily or go up in flames. You have to make sure every doll is made exactly the same way using the same materials. So the design is going to have to be fairly simple and you need to be able to replicate it easily. I felt like that was a little bit too restrictive for me, so I decided to go down the path of making one-of-a-kind art dolls. Now, if you just make a soft, cuddly doll that's clearly for children, you can't just say it's an art doll. It's a bit of a minefield, but essentially, if you decide to make art dolls for adults, they need to be made in a way that appeals to adult collectors rather than children. And you have to be very clear wherever you're selling them that they are collector's items and not to be played with. Some countries are a little bit more relaxed about this, but I think it makes sense in any case to be clear about who your dolls are for. Secondly, what media do you want to use? Textile dolls or soft sculptures can be made from various types of fabric. Often they're made from quilting cotton or cotton poplin fabric. Or they can be knitted, crocheted or needle felted. Depending on the type of doll, they can be jointed with beads, buttons or ribbons, or you can even embed mechanical joints into them. I mostly make cloth dolls, so I'll go into the materials I use in a lot more depth in another episode. If you decide on making art dolls rather than toys, it does give you a lot more freedom when it comes to the materials that you use. There are so many options available now. Clay dolls can be jointed, or you can make a wire armature and pad it out with wadding, then sew fabric around it. That can be a really fun way to make a freestanding doll that's more like a sculpture. There are different types of clay you can buy for doll making. Polymer clay is one option that can be cured in a household oven. There are also some great air drying clays available now that don't require curing with heat at all. Paper clay can be really nice to use, and if you're on a budget, you can even make your own. If you don't want to make a doll body from scratch, there are lots of options for doll bodies that you can customise. A lot of people start learning customisation with Monster High dolls because they're really accessible and an affordable way of buying a ball-jointed doll. The heads are also a really nice size and shape for repainting. Blythe dolls are another option. They're such beautiful dolls, and I've seen some incredible custom Blythe dolls, although they are a little bit more expensive. So if you're just starting to learn the skills involved, it can feel like a lot to pay for something that you could potentially ruin. There are blank ball-jointed dolls you can buy too, or of course there are reborn dolls, but these can be quite costly. You have to be able to put quite a lot of money into your craft if you're going to learn with those. The next question to ask yourself is, how do you learn best? Do you find it easiest to learn new skills by yourself, so you can focus without distractions? Or do you need other people around you so you can ask questions and bounce ideas off each other? Are you more of a visual learner? Or do you need to get stuck in and try things and learn as you go? Some people find it easiest to work to a pattern or a book, while for others, online courses and YouTube videos are the easiest way to learn. Depending on where you live, there may be local classes you can attend to learn the basic skills. That can be great for people who learn best in a group setting. If you don't have access to a class, there are online communities you can join to get support and meet like-minded people. When I started, YouTube was still relatively new and there wasn't the amount of educational content on there that there is today. I learned a lot from books, as I mentioned earlier, though I think now you can search for pretty much any doll making question you could have and find the answer on YouTube. For those listening on a podcast player, I do have a YouTube channel where I share lots of doll making tips, and it's always nice to see people asking questions and supporting each other in the comments. As a beginner, I learned a lot from other doll makers in Facebook groups. Online communities are a great place to get recommendations for patterns and for solving specific problems, as well as collaborating with other artists and just encouraging each other. In 2011, pretty much everybody was on Facebook, so that was the place to go to find any sort of community. I was in a few doll-related groups. I think there are still doll-making groups on Facebook, although the ones I've seen recently aren't quite as active as they were in the early days. I think Discord and Reddit are probably good places to find community now, although I haven't really got into either of those platforms, but if you do use them, it's worth having a look to see what groups are there. And if you can't find any active doll-making communities, you could always make your own. So now you know what you want to make, what do you need to get started? I think when you're getting started, the biggest investment you're going to need to make, if you don't already have one, is going to be a sewing machine. Even if you're making clay dolls or doing custom repaints, you're probably going to want to make some sort of clothing or accessories for them. You can hand stitch small items, but a sewing machine does come in handy for a lot of things, and it makes things a lot easier. You don't need anything too fancy. You can probably find something second-hand that'll do the job. A basic tabletop sewing machine is going to do most of the things you need. You will find yourself building up quite a collection of tools and gadgets. These will vary depending on the type of dolls you're making. Doll needles are very long sewing needles, and these come in really handy for jointing and a lot of other things. A good pair of forceps or hemostats, depending on where you are in the world, come in really handy for a lot of things in doll making, and a good set of mini pliers will be handy too. A lot of doll makers use a hot glue gun for bits that need to be stuck down. I do have a glue gun, but to be honest, I haven't used it in years. If I need to glue something, I prefer to use a good quality water-based craft glue. When it comes to materials like glues, paints, pencils, and things like that, quality is important, and there are a few things you need to consider depending on who you're making the dolls for. For children's toys, they obviously need to be non-toxic, hard-wearing and waterproof. They're probably going to need to be cleaned at some point, so washable fabric paints can be a good option for adding detail. For art dolls, longevity is more important. If someone is buying a collectible art doll, they're going to want that doll to last for years without fading or discolouring. So this is where archival materials come in. If you're buying anything like paints, pens, glue, sealers or any sort of pigment to use on an art doll, it's a good idea to make sure you're buying artist quality materials. Look for products that say they're archival quality, acid-free or pH neutral. It can be tempting to pick up a cheap PVA craft glue, but some of them can turn yellow or go very brittle and crack over time. Colours should also be marked as light fast, so they don't fade. It's really not worth buying cheap coloured pencils or pastels. The amount of pigment in them is so low it can be hard to get any depth of colour at all. A lot of the pens and pencils I use are by Divergent, which aren't the most expensive brand, but they are really nice quality, and they have a lot of vegan-friendly options too. I don't use any animal products in my dolls, so that's an important consideration for me personally. I've seen some doll artists using products made for human hair on the dolls. I haven't tried this, but it's something I wouldn't really recommend for an art doll. Hair products are generally designed for short-term use, so there's no guarantee that they're gonna last and won't discolour or go sticky in a year or two. I haven't been able to find a good doll hair wax that doesn't contain beeswax, so if you happen to know of one, I'd love to hear about it. So once you've got the tools and materials you need to get started, you need to decide on the style and shape of the doll you're going to make. If you're customizing a ready-made doll, this is pretty much sorted for you, but you'll probably still want to make clothes. If you're making cloth dolls, it can be helpful to get started with a pattern. So can you just buy a doll pattern from Etsy and start making dolls to sell? Well, it depends. When somebody creates a pattern, they are automatically protected by copyright. They don't need to register anything. They created it, it's theirs. So it's up to the designer of the pattern what use of it is allowed. This will be in the item description or in the seller's general information. Some sellers will say their patterns are for personal use only. Some will say you can sell the dolls you make as long as you state it was made from their pattern. Some don't require you to give credit at all, as long as you're not mass producing them in a factory. Some patterns will be sold completely copyright free with no restrictions at all, so always check copyright information before you make anything to sell. Of course, if you design your own pattern, then you own the rights to it. If you're just starting to learn how dolls are constructed, it can be a good idea to try working to a few existing patterns first. Then you'll start learning different jointing techniques and developing your own personal style. Over time, you'll start developing your own templates that are unique to you. You can start, as I did, with a copyright-free pattern and adjust it until you get the shape you want. Or, if you're good with design software, you can use something like Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape to draft a pattern. I like to draw patterns out by hand. I've worked out a lot of the proportions by trial and error and what looks right to me. But if you're aiming for realistic human proportions, an artist mannequin can be a really useful tool. So, what if you make your first doll and it doesn't turn out the way you want it to? Should you just quit and accept that doll making isn't for you? Whatever route you take as a doll maker, it's going to take a lot of practice to get where you want to be. For the first year or two, you're going to feel like your dolls don't look the way you want them to. This is known as the skills gap. You have taste and enough knowledge to tell that something is well made, but at this stage you don't yet have the skills to make a doll to that standard. This will get easier over time. The more dolls you make, the better they'll get. The funny thing is that the more doll making techniques you learn, the more you'll look at other people's work and think, if only I could make dolls like that. It's easy to look at other artists' work and feel inadequate, but when you look back at the dolls you made a year ago, you'll be amazed at how far you've come. Even now, I look back at dolls I made a year ago and cringe a bit. I'm sure a year from now I'll look back on what I'm making now and feel the same. This is a sign of growth. If you're constantly practicing and learning new skills, then you're growing as an artist and as an individual. So, don't be afraid to try something new. Be kind to yourself. Keep practicing. It's good to have goals, but always acknowledge the progress you've already made.